to pass the bill as soon as possible. I now propose a question to you, and that is a Sex Discrimination Amendment Bill 2014 be read the second time. In accordance with the rules of procedure, the debate is now adjourned. The bill is referred to the House Committee.
Secretary or Mr. Albert Chan, call for quorum.
食物及衞
Secretary for Food and Health. President, I move that the private Columbaria bill be read the second time. The bill seeks primarily to provide for a licensing regime to regulate private Columbaria. The administration has been implementing a columbarium policy through a three-pronged strategy. We are committed to promoting sustainable burials, including scattering of ashes at sea or remembrance gardens. We also take active steps to increase the supply of public niches and regulate the operation of private columbaria. The administration previously conducted 2 rounds of public consultation, the outcome of which was reported to the relevant LegCo panel. The consultation outcome shows that there is general public support for the government to regulate private columbaria through a licensing regime. There are diverse views, however, over how best certain columbaria which do not comply with existing statutory and government requirements should be handled. Some demand stringent regulation, while others remind us that upsetting the resting place of the deceased should not be contemplated lightly. Against the above backdrop, we must ensure that a well-balanced licensing regime is introduced to balance the divergent concerns of residents, family members of the deceased, and other stakeholders. For private columbaria which have long been in existence but which are unable to comply with the relevant requirements, we hope to handle them in a pragmatic manner. Under the proposed licensing regime, a person may not operate a private columbarium in Hong Kong unless he's been granted a license exemption or temporary suspension of liability, TSOL. Otherwise, it is an improper handling of ashes. Otherwise, it would be an offence. Improper handling of ashes or cessation of a columbarium operation is also an offence. If summarily convicted, the maximum penalty is $2 million in fine and 3 years imprisonment. If convicted by indictment, the maximum penalty is $5 million in fine and 7 years of imprisonment. Under the bill, a columbarium refers to premises used or intended to be used for the interment of ashes. We propose to set up the Private Columbaria Licensing Board as the licensing authority. The Director of Food and Environmental Hygiene, the FEH, will be the chairman, and members of the public will be members. The FEHD will be the executive arm and the law enforcement body for the bill. The special arrangements will be made for pre-bill columbarium under the bill. Now, the government announced at 8 a.m. on the 18th of June 2014 that the Chief Executive and Council has endorsed the tabling of the bill to LegCo, and that is set as the cut-off date in determining the eligibility of pre-bill columbarium. Under the bill, to obtain to be granted a license, private columbarium must comply with land planning and buildings requirements, and they must also submit a management plan. And also the premises must be owned by the operator. Apart from the special arrangement for pre-bill columbaria, all private columbaria must comply with the above stringent requirements. We note that for some existing private columbarium, they may not be able to comply fully with the government and statutory requirements. They may need time to enable themselves to meet with this requirement. So they could therefore apply for a temporary suspension of liability, so that they could continue to operate after the bill is commenced and before they are granted exemption or license. Now, during the TSOL period, the columbaria may not sell or let out new or unoccupied niches, and its non-compliance must not be worsened either. And it should take reasonable steps as soon as possible to comply with all the relevant requirements for the granting of an exemption or license, and meet with the relevant plans, planning and building safety requirements. For each application of a TSOL, the first application will be for a period of no less than 3 years, and an extension may not exceed another 3 years. Some believe the 6-year period is too liberal, but I must point out that we should allow time for private columbaria to meet the relevant requirements and rectify all non-compliances, so they are eligible for an exemption or license. This is appropriate. Otherwise, many of the there will be massive relocation of ashes in these columbaria, upsetting the resting place of deceased, and descendants will have to look for alternative places to keep the ashes, and that will cause social discord. For the first application, usually not every case will be granted 3 years. The licensing board will have regard to the situation and exercise discretion in granting extension. Now, for dated columbaria, the bills suggest that they must comply with the following requirement. First, they must have started operation before the 1st of January 1990, and they must stop selling or letting out new or unoccupied ashes at 8 a.m. on the 18th of June 2014, and they must fulfill the other requirements under the bill. For example, the operator must have occupation rights for the premises for no less than 5 years. For non-compliant structures that fall within the scope of the bill, if necessary, there must be certification by qualified professionals on the structural safety before the structures could be kept. Some believe that the interment of ash in niche is the defining criterion for eligibility for exemption, and some believe this is too stringent. So some who may have bought niches may not be able to keep ashes in those niches. But I understand the sentiment, but because the exemption covers dated columbaria, and there are special arrangements in place, and they may not necessarily meet all the government and statutory requirements, and they will not need a license to continue operation. And then for non-compliant structures, there may be safety issues, and if they meet the safety requirement, then they could be kept. So we have to be stringent since we're making all this special arrangement. We don't want anyone to abuse the system. So that, and also we do not know if the bill will be passed in LESCO, and people who have already bought niches should discuss with the operator on the transitional arrangement. I pointed out that there are 2 special arrangements under the licensing scheme. That is, if the columbarian is not in self-owned premises, the operator must have occupation right for the premises for no less than 5 years. That's one requirement. The other requirement is that for non-compliant structures that meet the definition under the bill, there must be certification by qualified professionals about the structural safety of the structures before they could be kept. Some believe that government is letting the non-compliant private columbarium off, but we must understand this first. To obtain a license, the private columbarium must meet all the relevant land, planning, and buildings requirements under the bill. Take planning requirement as an example. The columbarium must meet every requirement under the Town Planning Ordinance Cap 131, and these are stringent requirements. And 2, where if the administration is not sensitive enough in handling the issue, then there will be massive relocation of ashes after the commencement of the bill, and that is a reality we have to face. And that will upset the resting place of the deceased. It will lead to social discord. So for private columbaria already in existence before the licensing regime is in place, we must deal with them in a pragmatic manner. And C, when the licensing board grants a license exemption or TSOL, it may impose conditions requiring the instrument holder to take steps and actions and minimize nuisances caused to nearby residents. The FEHD launched the notification scheme on the 18th of June 2014. Private Columbaria required to submit information to prove that they are pre-bill Columbaria. On the same day, the Development Bureau published a list of information on private Columbaria, and compared to that list, 85% on the list have already joined the notification scheme. And the FHD has been sending staff to private barrier in the past few days to verify the information they've submitted. The licensing board will have regard to the information collected under the notification scheme and decide whether a columbarium is a pre-built columbarium and whether it's in compliance with all the relevant requirements and instruments for the issuance of a license exemption on TSOL. To strengthen protection for consumers, the bill requires license holders to make sale agreement with consumers. That there must be details describing the interment right, for instance, the size of the niche, the interment period, fees involved, and so on, and also whether there's some maintenance fund. The bill also requires that the sale agreement must include certain important information. Otherwise, the consumers may ask to cancel the agreement and seek a refund. The operators have the duty to ensure that ashes are properly disposed of before cessation. It will be a criminal offense if this is not done. The bill is also have provisions for arrangement in the case of secession, involving the handling of ashes and so on. At the moment, the operation of private columbaria must meet all the requirements of land, town planning, and building safety. After the commencement of the bill, apart from the two special arrangements that apply to pre-bill columbaria, for private columbaria not in compliance with the licensing requirements under the bill, they will not be issued a license. So consumers must note the risk. They must not arbitrarily buy private niches. Otherwise, it's possible that in future the columbarium may fail to get a license and the consumers will suffer loss. Now, before the columbarium could meet the existing requirements, and if it claims that it's going to be issued a license and that niche prices may rise. Now, this is a means to promote marketing that is unacceptable. Before the commencement of the bill, members of the public must note several points if they want to keep ashes somewhere. First, it's not sure whether the current bill will be passed by this council. And then the situation for each columbarium may be different. So we cannot give any guarantee that or any columbarium will be given a license in future. Even if a columbarium is already on the Development Bureau's information on private columbaria, Part 1, there is still no guarantee. And even if a license is granted, we cannot know now what the eventual cap would be under the license for the deposit of ashes. So if anyone claims that they're going to be issued a license in future and they can guarantee that there won't be any impact on the keeping of ashes, well, if such claim is made, consumers must be particularly careful. If necessary, they may want to seek independent legal advice. And I would like to take this opportunity to remind consumers too that if they are planning to buy or let out or to rent a niche, they must seek all comprehensive information from the operators. They must also check whether the columbarium is in compliance with land, town planning, and building safety requirements. And they should also find out from the operators if there should be a cessation of business, how the ashes would be dealt with. They must also consider the rights and interests should they be affected in the case of a cessation. And for instance, whether there will be refund or compensation. And consumers must also note that there are relevant clauses in the sale agreement to protect their rights and interests. For example, information on financial risk involved for prepayment. If necessary, again, consumers should seek independent legal advice on their own rights and interests. The bill does not apply to the following. A columbarium that is built, operated, administered, or maintained by the government, including one in a common a crematorium specified in Part 5 of the 5th Schedule to the Public Health and Municipal Services Ordinance, Cap. 132. B. An authorized private crematorium in Part 6 of the 5th Schedule to Cap. 132 to the extent that the keeping of ashes in it is transient and incidental to its operation as a crematorium. C. A columbarium in a private cemetery specified in Part 2 of the 5th Schedule to Cap. 132, but it will continue to be regulated under the Private Cemeteries Regulation, Cap. 132 BF. D. A columbarium, or if any in future, operated by the Board of Management of Chinese Permanent Cemeteries outside private cemeteries specified in Cap. 132, but it will be made subject to regulation under Cap. 132 BF, that is the Private Cemeteries Regulation. E. Undertakes with their licenses not prohibiting storage of ashes in their place of business, but they will continue to be regulated under the Undertakers of Burial Regulations, Cap. 132 CB, and will be subject to the provisions in this bill on proper handling of interred ashes before ceasing their columbarium operation. And after keeping of no, or for example, we may cap the number of containers of ashes that can be kept, and they must also take measures to minimize environmental nuisance caused to the neighborhood. And if necessary, if they are to cease business, they must make sure there's proper handling of the ashes. F. The keeping of no more than 5 containers of ashes, with each container containing the ashes of one person only in domestic premises. I must point out that the proposed licensing regime could not offer a panacea to each and every problem inherited from the past. For instance, we cannot expect the bill to have retrospective effect in relation to consumer protection. And we cannot expect the bill to apply to sale agreement entered into before the commencement of the bill. Now, as for unwieldy situations that might eventually come about, we will not be able to provide a perfect solution. For instance, by using public niches to accommodate displaced ashes from private columbaria which are not granted license or exemption. Now, there will be an unrealistic expectation. Now, the administration has considered the following factors. First, the macro interest of the community. 2, the sentiments of the family members of the deceased. They want the deceased not to have a proper resting place, and that it won't be upset. C, to minimize the nuisance caused to the neighborhood of private columbaria, and D, to ensure sustainable operation. On the whole, the administration has tried its best to come up with a reasonable and suitable regulation regime, and we have balanced the concerns of all stakeholders. I hope members will support the bill and complete the scrutiny of the bill as soon as possible so that the licensing regime could be implemented soon. The administration will continue with this three-pronged strategy in implementing the columbarium policy, that is to increase the supply of public niches, promote sustainable burials, and regulate private columbaria. Thank you, President. And I propose the question to you, and that is that the private columbaria bill be read the second time. In accordance with the rules of procedure, the debate is now adjourned and the bill is referred to the House Committee.
We now receive